Yesterday, or was it a few days ago, there was a woman in Morocco. I don't think she's Jewish, but she gave birth to 9 tuplets, 9 babies at once. That's quite miraculous. My wife has given birth to 7 babies, each individually, and that's miraculous, and that's amazing. 9 at once. If they all survive, she will break a world record. So this is a woman in Morocco. And in Judaism, Mother's Day is not limited to one day of the year where we give thanks to our mothers, but rather every single day we have the commandment, Kabed es avicha ve'esimecha, to honor our father and our mothers. So it's a constant for us to always be aware of caring, of looking after, and it comes with its challenges sometimes, but I guess that's why it's one of the only 2 mitzvahs in all of Torah that carries with it a tremendous reward, which is longevity, lema'an yarichun yamecha, that your life will be lengthened. And just to think about life, the very word life, what is the middle of the word? If. Im. God is saying, if you only follow what and do what I ask you to, then you will see the abundant blessings that I have for you, as we read this past Shabbos in Shul, in the portion of the Chukosai, all the blessings that the Torah gives us for following in the ways of God. So today we're going to look at somebody who didn't have to follow, but rather chose to do so voluntarily. And I think that is something we can learn from. And what I thought we should do is a little bit more, just to first dissect the reason why we read the book of Ruth, and then to take some lessons that we could glean from for our own lives from Ruth and from the book of Ruth that we could find relevant to learn from. So here comes Shavuos. I remember spending Shavuos once, many years ago, over 20 years ago, at the Bevis Mock Synagogue in downtown London. And the rabbi was Rabbi Barry Malkus, who formerly was from Waverly Shul. I knew nothing about Waverly Shul back then. And he said in his speech, we need more Ruths and less ruthlessness in our world. So I guess on Shavuos, in shuls all over the world, our ears are treated to the melodious sing-song of Megillas Ruth, because we need more Ruths and less ruthlessness. Which reminds me, who did Ruth marry? She married Boaz, right? So what was Boaz before he married Ruth? Anyone know? He was ruthless. Okay, so in a nutshell, we're going to read this book, and the book tells us about, something. I have my notes on my phone, but I don't know where my phone is. I'm going to ask you guys to give me a minute, because I wrote myself some notes of things specifically that I want to talk about, and obviously I coordinated with my slides. So let me just find my phone quickly, because without it, I won't be able to remember exactly what specific things I wanted to tell you. So seize that moment to grab your coffee, say a little l'chaim. We're going to take a quick commercial break. I'll be right back in a minute, and we'll continue our share. Okay, ladies and gents, that was a quick minute, wasn't it? Right? We call that a New York minute. All right, so with that in mind, we're going to begin. We're going to talk here about the book of Ruth and its significance, why we're talking about it on Shavuos. There's a lot to discuss, so feel free to interject at any point if you have a specific question, something you wanted me to address. Feel free to interject, to unmute yourself. But in a nutshell, the book of Ruth tells us about Ruth. We call her the Moabite. She was a Moabite princess, very fine character. And she obviously was not happy. She was dissatisfied with the lifestyle that she was used to of her own people, where she was a princess, and yet it was a life of idol worship. And when the opportunity arose, she gladly gave up all the privileges in a royal land, all the royalty that she had as a princess, and accepted instead a life of Judaism. Now, this doesn't always have to be the case, but in her instance, it was, where it came at first with poverty, and it wasn't easy to join the Jewish people, but we admire her for that, and we learn lessons from that. And ultimately, Ruth converted properly according to Jewish law at the time. She married into a prominent family from the tribe of Yehuda. And who is her descendant, who was born and passed away on Shavuos? David HaMelech. Now that's going to come up in a moment because I'm going to go through the various reasons why we read the book. But let's begin, or let's proceed by looking at the different reasons why we're going to read it on Shavuos particularly. The custom of reciting the book of Ruth on Shavuos was actually recorded. It's written in Shulchan Aruch and the Code of Jewish Law. And we are told there as follows. V'noyegin loymar Rus b'Shavuos, that on Shavuos we read the book of Ruth. So we're going to go first in order for the order of today's shir. I'd like to start off with just going through various reasons why we're reading Ruth on Shavuos, okay? The source of this, actually, the Shulchan Aruch tells us, comes from a 14th century Spanish scholar. He's known as the Avudraham. His name is Rabbi David ben Yosef Avudraham. Okay, he was quite a known scholar in Spain, a leader of Spanish Jewry, and he's famous for his work, which we call the Avudraham after him, but it's a work that discusses the various prayers and blessings, and he completed this book in 1340. It's a commentary on the daily prayers on Shabbos and Yom Tov, and collects various customs and laws relating to them. So he, in the 1300s, is collecting this information 7 centuries ago for us of what Jews did back then. It's just interesting for us to see the compilation and knowing, how it evolves, how customs come about. So if you want to know where this custom comes from, certainly it's recorded in 1300s and very likely goes back much further. And he says as follows: B'chag HaShavuos na'agu likrois Ruth. On Shavuos, it's customary to read the book of Ruth. Why? Because it says shekasel b'bitchilas katsir sa'urim, because it's written in the beginning of the barley harvest. Huzman HaKatzir, and Shavuos is celebrated in the harvest season. Remember that all Jewish festivals are related to an agricultural season as well. So Jewish festivals have an agricultural element to them. So, in fact, one of the names that the Torah uses in reference to Shavuos is what? Chag HaKatzir, which is the festival of the harvest. So Shavuos is during the harvest season in Israel. It's a time for us to express our gratitude to God for supplying us with all his bounty. So the book of Ruth, which mentions the harvest season, is read on Shavuos, and that's why you oftentimes see that Shavuos is referred to in the with barley or harvest kind of. Let me just find here. Okay, this is the story of Ruth in a nutshell, which we're going to get to in a moment. Now, another reason given for reading the book of Ruth on Shavuos, says the Avudraham, v'oid tam acher, another reason that he writes here is lefisha aveseinu lekibros haTorah, because we know that our ancestors received the Torah, v'lo nichnesu libris, and that is when they entered this covenant with God. When? Ela b'milah. They had to first be circumcised, right? In order to receive the Torah at Mount Sinai. Utvila, and they had to immerse in a mikvah. V'haitzaz damim, and they had to be sprinkled with blood, with the sacrificial blood. Kidisa v'perak hacholetz, as is explained in the Talmud, in the chapter that discusses this. Ruth gam hinis gaira, and now Ruth, we know she was a convert, and this is a whole book in Tanakh that talks about conversion, a person who converted to Judaism. As we know, what does she say? Ki asher telechi elech, wherever you go, I will go, right? And converts go through this process But on Shavuos, all of us are like converts to Judaism. So that's another reason that the Avudraham gives, that the status of the Jewish people is not just that we were descendants of Abraham and we became a Jewish nation at Mount Sinai. That's when we became the Jewish people, right? This was our conversion process to Judaism. And because the protagonist of the book of Ruth, Ruth herself, was the prototype, the poster child, so to say, of a convert to Judaism. So we read her story on Shavuos because we're all like converts on Shavuos, just as she was. Okay, now another reason, we're going to go again through various reasons of why we're reading this book on Shavuos. So we said number one is because of the beginning of the barley harvest, right? And Shavuos is the Chag HaKatzir, the harvest festival. That's number one. The second reason we said is because on Shavuos, we all converted to Judaism, mass conversion of the Jewish people. Ruth, the ultimate convert, so we read it on Shavuos. Now, another reason why Jews read the book of Ruth on Shavuos, and this is found in a book called Sha'arei Teshuvah. What does the Sha'arei Teshuvah say? This is written by another 13th century Spanish scholar. And he also says, well, since King David is a descendant of Ruth, and this is his yard site, and this is also his birthday, well, King David certainly was no small figure in Jewish history. And not only that, he makes reference to the fact that King David's Jewish lineage was being questioned. So because King David's authenticity, his lineage was being questioned, that's why we actually read this book on Shavuos. What is the background behind the skepticism of David HaMelech's lineage, his pedigree? Reminds me of the good old story I like to say about the rabbinic convention. And the rabbis are sitting around the table, each one showing off their lineage. My Zayda was the chief rabbi of his city. Yeah, my grandmother was the chief rebbitzin of our whole country. And the other one, my great-grandfather was the chief rabbi of the whole Ichveisnish, the whole world. And one guy there says, listen, I'm about tshuva. Maybe his parents were converts, whatever it was. He says, my parents taught me fresh bread is better than stale, old, fresh stunken bread. So King David's pedigree is being questioned. Why? Because he's a descendant of Ruth. But then why should his lineage be so questioned? What's the problem if he's a descendant of Ruth? So for that, we're going to go into some Gemara now. All right. If you want to follow along with me, I guess the basic text you should have with you is the book of Ruth. Otherwise, I don't have the text here on the screen today, so I won't be able to put them up here for you, but I could read them aloud and you can follow along. I'm going right now into the Gemara. We're going into the Talmud Tractate Yevamos. If you're following along, this is Daf Ayin Vav and Ayin Zayin. We're going to go to the 76th and 77th page. And here's the Talmud recounts a fascinating conversation that was held between King Saul, and his warriors, which obviously shed some light on this story. So I'm going to read this to you from the Talmud. Now, when Shaul, King Saul, saw that King David, now don't forget, King David was going to become his son-in-law. That's a whole story. And that whole story actually is very relevant to the story of Shavuos. But I'll just read it in the words of the Talmud. We'll go to the background afterwards. In fact, let me just read it to you in English from the Gemara. The Gemara says here, when Shaul saw David going out towards the Philistines, he said to Avner, the general of his army, who is this youth? Right? Who is this Avner? Avner said, B'chayai, in my life, by my life, I don't know, I have no clue who this is. But did King Shaul really not know who this was? The Gemara asks. Isn't it written earlier? And King Shaul loved David greatly and became his armor bearer. That meaning David became King Shaul's armor bearer. So if that's the case, of course he's familiar with him. Why is he asking this question? Zak the Gemara explains Shaul meant, is he a descendant of Peretz? Or is he a descendant of Zerach? Who were Peretz and Zerach? They were the two sons of Yehuda. Remember the story of Yehuda and Tamar? We discussed that long ago in a previous shir when we were holding in the parsha of Vayeshev and Miketz. So if he descended from Peretz, we know he'll eventually be the king. But if he descended from Zerach, then he'll only be an important person. Doeg Adoni was present, then said to Shaul, instead of inquiring whether he's fit to be king or not, why don't you investigate whether he's even Jewish or not? So Doeg Adoni is stirring the pot. He's making some trouble here. The Gemara asks, so Doeg says, what, now I'm trying to figure, this is the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what's the reason to think that he wouldn't be part of the Jewish people? What's Doeg Adoni, stirring here? Why would he say such a thing? It's explained because he descended from Ruth, who was a Moabite. So Avner responds, we learned, it says an Ammonite man, even after conversion, cannot marry a Jew. But this does not apply to the Ammonite woman, obviously, who converts. So a Moabite man, though he is converted, may not marry a Jew, the Gemara tells us. But this doesn't apply to the Moabite woman convert. The Torah tells us very clearly, why can they not marry into the Jewish people? It's a verse in the Torah. When we wanted to pass through their land, what happened? They refused to accommodate us, even though we wished to pay them. But they didn't want to allow us to go through their land. They wouldn't even offer us or allow us to purchase from them bread or water. And the Gemara tells us that Avner explained the difference. The reason why the Torah prohibits the men is because the verse tells us that they didn't come out to greet you with water, with bread and water, when you were on the road from the Exodus from Egypt. Now, if that's the case, why only the men? Is it only the men who didn't greet us? What about the women? So the Gemara explains this. It is customary for the men to meet the travelers. It's not customary for women, for modesty reasons, to go out there to be greeting all the travelers. So the Talmud says that the women are not included in this moratorium, or whatever you call the prohibition against marrying the Moabites. The prohibition is strictly on the men. And therefore, that if that's the case, David HaMelech, King David, is a descendant of Ruth and Boaz. Boaz was from Jewish lineage. In fact, he was from the tribe of Yehuda. Hence, David HaMelech is a descendant of Peretz, and meaning from the lineage of Yehuda. But Ruth is his great grandmother, and she was the Moabite, and a Moabite woman is allowed to marry into the Jewish people. Doeg replied, the men should have greeted the men, and the woman should have greeted the woman. Huh? Avner, the Gemara says, did not answer this. And then Shaul said, go and inquire at the Beis HaMedrash. Investigate. Determine whether Ruth was allowed to marry a Jew. And the Gemara continues that Doeg was told by the Chachamim, the scholars of that time, the verse excludes the woman, meaning the verse only prohibits the men from marrying in the Jewish people. Doeg then submitted his objections. What about the women? Should the women not have also been the ones greeting us? Why are only the men condemned? Right? He basically was trying to stir trouble, really. He wasn't, he was obviously defending or advising King Shaul against King David at this stage. And the Gemara concludes, now Amasa exclaimed. Who was Amasa? It says, Va'amasa va'amar. Came along Amasa, obviously is one of the scholars of the time, and he says, whoever does not accept this ruling should be stabbed by the sword. I have a tradition from the basement of Shmuel Haramati. Shmuel Haramati is a reference to the prophet Shmuel, who came from Ramah, that the women of Moab are allowed to marry into the Jewish community, meaning if they converted to Judaism. So this is the Gemara. So here we have the story. David HaMelech's lineage was questioned on the basis of the fact that he descended from Moab. Moab was historically hostile to our people, right? And therefore the Torah bans them from marrying into the Jewish nation. And the story goes back to the days when we were wandering in the desert. The Torah relates how the Moabite people did not greet them, and they refused to supply us with our needs. They refused to allow us to traverse through their land. In fact, they were the ones who hired the sorcerer Bilam to curse us. So therefore, they were forever banned from our people. They were not accepted. And Avner is the one who came. Avner is the one who said here that the Moabite women were not included in this prohibition because it wasn't common for the women to go out to greet the women, to be the ones, to take care of this business, the border control. So with this in mind, ladies and gents, this is another reason explaining why we read the book of Ruth on Shavuos, which is the yard site of David HaMelech. And we explained here from the Gemara this whole, why the Moabite women are allowed to marry into the Jewish people. And that's the Talmud here. Now we're going to go into another commentary on my source sheet. And that is I'm going to take you to the author of Lechadodi. Who is the author of Lechadodi? His name was Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. He composed the song we sing every Friday night, Lechadodi. In fact, if you look in the Siddur, you will see the acronym of his name along the first words of each line. The Shlomo Halevi. Okay? And he says that this debate was actually the impetus for the reason why Shmuel Hanavi, the prophet Shmuel to even write the book of Ruth. He says it was because the validity, the lineage of King David was being questioned. Let me read it to you in his words. He says, I have no doubt that at the point that they sent the question to Shmuel and asked him what the law was, it was then that he wrote this book as a halachic ruling that we know the lineage and we should know the story that a Moabite woman is fit to marry into the Jewish people. And he started the book recounting how the story of Ruth happened during the time of the greatest judge of all the judges of Israel, and Boaz married her with the consent of the court of this great judge, because the entire question was raised on account of David in this story that the Gemara tells us. And therefore, this book of Ruth, which tells us the lineage, the history, that it is that Ruth, who was married to Boaz, gave birth to Oved, and Oved was the father of Yishai, Jesse, and Yishai was the father of David. David ben Yishai, right? That's what we say. So it turns out that the whole book of Ruth, that this book of Ruth, which tells the story of how Ruth the Moabite married into the Jewish people with the consent of the highest of Jewish courts, is the proof that King David indeed was kosher. It proves it confirms his pedigree. And that's why we read the story on his yahrzeit on the anniversary of his passing on Shavuos. So that's another reason. Now we'll look at even another reason, the connection between Shavuos and Ruth, which we're going to find in the words of the Alter Rebbe in his Shulchan Aruch. Says the Alter Rebbe, why did we read Ruth on Shavuos? Because this is the day we received the Torah. Here's another reason he gives, that the Torah isn't easy to acquire. It's not easy to acquire the study of Torah and the observance of Judaism. Just like Ruth experienced the challenges, the struggles during her conversion to Judaism. So that's another perspective that's worth keeping in mind, that, conversion to Judaism has its struggles, has its challenges. It's not easy. And being a Jew is not easy. We are constantly persecuted. Look at the whole world. Look at our South African government right here. Israel is attacked. Israel's not a word. Just when Israeli police try to create peace, try to create law and order on the Temple Mount from hooligans, from rioters, what happens? Condemnation. This is what it means to be part of the Jewish people. So that was the Alter Rebbe's perspective. Another, just for good measure, let's add another one. This comes from a Turkish scholar by the name of Rabbi Yaakov Kuli. He wrote a very famous work called Yalkut Me'am Lo'ez. And it's worthwhile to study it. Yalkut Me'am Lo'ez is fascinating insights, midrashim, very interesting ideas on general Tanakh. You read the Yalkut Me'am Lo'ez on the weekly Parsha, gives you fascinating insight. And therefore he explains, Vatoma Ruth HaMoaviyah El Naomi. When Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, El Chana Hasada, I will go now to the field. Now, just very interesting, this insight that he gives here. And I'm just reading the insight, trying to read through it quickly and take the bottom line. But basically he explains here that there are people who say, had I started with Judaism in my youth, I would have conducted myself that way throughout my life. Had I been raised that way, and I hear it all the time, Rabbi, you were raised as a Jew, you were raised religious, so it's easy for you, Rabbi, because I was raised religious, I went to yeshiva. But for me, I'm an alta kaka, I'm too old, I can't start my lifestyle again like this. People say this. Says Rabbi Yaakov Kuli, the author of the Me'am Lo'ez, he says this myth has been dispelled so many times in our history. Now, we were recently learning about Rabbi Akiva and so many other greats. Rabbi Yaakov Kuli tells us, look at Ruth. She wasn't a young lady when she started. According to him, she was 40 years old when she embraced Torah and Judaism. Now I know some of us in this group are older than 40, some are younger than 40. That's not the point. His point he's making is it's never too late. In fact, in this week's Parsha, we see that of all the tribes, when the census was being conducted, the tribe of Levi, the Levites, were counted even in their old age, actually in the young age too, unlike the other tribes. And the reason it's explained is because they served in the Mishkan and in the temple, and because they ministered there, even though there was a term limit, so to say, but the message and lesson to us is it's never too late. That's our theme here in our Chabad Seniors program. Never too late, right?
Rabbi Akiva teaches us it's never too late.
Of course, Rabbi Yaakov Kuli here is telling us not only Rabbi Akiva. You could say Rabbi Akiva is a Talmudic sage. It teaches us that. Rabbi Yaakov Kuli says you can learn it also from Tanakh, from the story of Ruth. And honestly, it's throughout history. I can tell you there are people I know who started at an older and a more advanced age. They're all inspiration. You're all inspirations to me. So Rabbi Yaakov Kuli is saying, it's very nice that we point to Rabbi Akiva, who became a great sage, but yesterday was Mother's Day. So Mother's Day, we're going to look at a woman who wasn't a rabbi. Maybe Rabbi Akiva, it's fascinating how he became such a great scholar, teacher, thinker. But here we can learn about the Jewish woman who wasn't born Jewish, who became one of the greatest Jewish mothers in history, the great-grandmother of David HaMelech, right? So his message is, it's very clear, it's never too late to start doing the right thing. And I think that also is an important message to us as we learn, yes, acquiring Torah doesn't come easy, as certainly it took hard work for Ruth, as we see in the story, which I have a feeling we're only going to get to tomorrow, even though I was hoping to do this all today. But the fact that Ruth may have had a later start in life teaches us that it's never too late. And therefore, the message to all of us on Shavuos is, as we're approaching the festival of the giving of the Torah, we should remind ourselves it's never too late to learn the Torah. Now, it's interesting that though this is mentioned in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, right, and actually mentions it twice, but in Chabad tradition, we actually don't read it as part of our prayers. We read it at night when we read the Tikkun Leil Shavuos. It's part of the Tikkun, but it's not read in the shul service. Okay, it's not, even though there's a deep connection to it. Okay, but it's not part of the actual texts that we read during the Torah readings. If you want a little bit of a shorter Shavuos experience, come to us at Chabad. I'm just kidding. But why? I saw some interesting insights. I actually saw a teaching of the Rebbe from this, where he says that it's not actually read on Shavuos, but it's not read as part of our service, but it is read in the Tikkun Leil, in the book that we read a whole night. Don't forget, we stay up all night this coming Sunday night. I recommend everybody get some good rest on Shabbos, because this coming Sunday we stay up all night studying, right? So that's just the beginning. That's just the first thoughts about the connection of Ruth to Shavuos. That's the first part. But Ruth isn't the only protagonist. She's not the only personality in this book. Okay, we see the connection, but let's go into the book itself. And I recommend if anyone wants to go get your book of Ruth, because I didn't include it in here, and it would probably be a good idea to have a little bit of the book of Ruth in front of you. Let's just see what we could do. I don't think I could come up with a quick enough solution. I'm putting the book of Ruth up here. Let me just think quickly. I could go onto what's this app called? Sefaria. Let me just quickly see if I could go onto Sefaria and put Ruth on and Sefaria. Give me a second, ladies and gents. I will try to put Sefaria up here. Okay, so you could all follow along and we could actually read a little bit of the book of Ruth together. My computer's being a little bit slow today, so you'll have to deal with it. Just a second, Sefaria. Or maybe if I just type in Book of Ruth, I'm sure I could get it up here. Okay, right. Sefaria puts it up. Okay, I will share. I'm going to start with the first chapter. Let's read it inside together, and then we'll discuss it. Okay, so I'm going to put the first chapter up here. Let me just share my screen again, and we'll read it verse by verse so that we could get a little bit of an understanding of the book of Ruth, in the actual text. Okay, just a second. I don't know what's going on at computers. I think I got a virus there. Okay, can everybody see? Okay, this is a wonderful, wonderful app. It's called Sefaria. And what Sefaria does is makes Torah very accessible in Hebrew, in English, and it's just incredible, because anytime I need texts, I go to this website, Sefaria, and what it does is it gives us the text right here. Okay, so let's read it together aloud, and then we will analyze and dissect some of the messages and lessons that we could take from here. And I have a feeling we're just gonna touch the surface of it today, so we'll have to continue tomorrow, despite that not being the original plan. Okay, Vayihi bimei shefota shoftim, and it was in the days of the chieftains, when the chieftains ruled. Okay, the shoftim, the judges, were the rulers of Israel. Vayihi ra'av ba'aretz, and there was a famine in the land. Vayelechish, and went along a man Beis Lechem of Bethlehem. Where is Bethlehem? In the region of Yehuda, what we call Judah and Samaria, but what the rest of the world likes to call the West Bank. Okay. Lagur b'sdei Moab, he went with his wife and 2 sons. They left Israel and they went to live in the field, and they went to live in Moab. Okay. Who the Ishtay Ushnei Banav, he went with his 2 sons to the land of Moab. So what we know so far about him is that he is a shofet. He is one of the famous judges of Israel at the time. V'shem Aish, what was the name of this person? His name was Elimelech. V'shem Ishto Naomi, his wife's name was Naomi, who we're going to learn plenty about as well. V'shem Shnei Vanav, who were his two sons. They were Machlon and Chilion. Ephratayim, they were, from which tribe? Ephraim. Ephraimites of Beis Lechem. In the plain, in the area of Yehuda, Vayivos Demo Vayusham. They came to the country of Moab and they remained there. Why did they go to Moab? Let's remind ourselves as we learn. There was a famine in Israel. What does it tell us about them so far as we read that? Well, how does it say? When the going gets tough, the tough get going? Well, in this case, I don't know where, you think about it. If you're a leader, you abandon your flock. If he was a shofet, if he was a judge, the judges should stay present, should be there with their people. Instead, he abandoned ship. Vayamas Elimelech ish Naomi. And this didn't turn out very well for them because Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. And she was left alone, just her with her two sons, Machlon and Chilion. Vayisu lahem nashim mavos. These two sons grew up. They married Moabite women, Shema Achas Orpah. One married a woman named Orpah. Anyone famous, by the name of Orpah? Anyone? Yes, Oprah Winfrey. Her real name is Orpah. Yeah. But as we will come to discover, if her parents only knew what our sages said about her, I don't know if they really would want to give her that name. V'shem Hashenis Ruth. And the other woman's name was Ruth. Vayeshvu Sham, and they lived there together, Eser Shanim, for 10 years. Vayamusu Gam Shnehem. Then Naomi's terrible tragedy. Not only did she lose her husband, Elimelech, who was a judge, who was a prestigious person, very wealthy in Israel, he dies thinking he's saving his wealth when he goes to Moab because now he doesn't have to share his wealth with all the poor people in Israel. Why should he share his wealth with the Schnorrers, right? So he goes off, they go off to Moab. And now both the sons died. Oy. So, sorry, it's someone have a question. And now she remains not only a widow, but she is bereft without her two sons who have died. She started out with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab. Why? Because in the country of Moab, it wasn't so good anymore. She didn't have good luck. Things weren't turning out so well. And in Israel now, there was food. God remembered his people, and things were returning to a good place in Israel. She decided enough of Moab, going back to Israel. Where is Moab? I imagine I'm not sure. I think it's Syria, I think. Let's continue the verse. Sorry, next verse. Verse 8. Naomi. Oh, sorry. Now we continue 7. She went with her two daughters-in-law. Remember, with Ruth and Orpah. And they continue on their way. She set out back to Israel. As she's making her way to Israel, Naomi turns to her two daughters-in-law. And she says to them, listen, go back, turn back each of you to your mother's house. Go back home. Yas Hashem imachem chesed. May Hashem deal kindly with you. Kasher asisem imamesim ve'imadi. Just as you dealt kindly with the dead and with me. Obviously, they were good to her sons. And now she's thanking them and saying, hasta la vista, goodbye. She says, Yiten Hashem lachem, may Hashem grant each of you umatzah menucha, isha base isha. I see we have Yehuda's menucha. Your name is mentioned here. Hashem should give you each menucha, security, serenity. It should all be good with you. You should find your own husbands, right? And vatishak lahen, she kissed them. Vatisana kolan, this is a farewell. They lifted their voices. Vativkena, they broke into weeping. Vatomarnala, and now to her, who said to her, Ki itach nashuv la'amech. They said to Naomi, no, we are going to go with you to your people. So they're right now being very courteous, both of them. They say, no, we want to go with you, Naomi. But Naomi says, no. Shava v'benoisai. Turn back, my daughters. Lama telach Naomi. Why should you go with me? Ha'oidli banim b'mei. Do I have more sons in my body? V'hayu lechem nanashim, to go for you as husbands. Shava v'benoisai lechna. Turn back, my daughters. Go home. Ki zakanti, for I am too old, mi ish, to be married. Ki amarti yesh li tikva gam hayisi halayla leish v'gam yoladati banim. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I married tonight and I also bore sons. So now, again, learning the message of never too late. Naomi's saying, I don't think I could bear children. But let's see what's going on. Halahan, should you wait for me? She says, Teisaberna ada sheyigdalu alahen teagne levilti hayois leish. Should you wait for, even if I did have children, you're going to wait for them to grow up? You're going to be much older than them. It doesn't make sense. So you go, my daughters. She says, I have a bitter life. It's not the life you want. And as she says here, God has struck out against me. Why did she feel that that she misbehaved? God struck. She obviously realized we abandoned our people. We did the wrong thing. And God is not happy with me. Batisna koilon, and now they broke into weeping. They both cried again. Here are the key words for tomorrow's shir. I want you, because we're going to read a few more verses, and these are the verses I want you to hold on to for tomorrow's discussion. Listen, read these words carefully with me, because this is the basis of our shir tomorrow. Vatashk Orpa lechamosa. Orpa kissed her mother-in-law Naomi. Ruth dafkaba, but Ruth clung to her. Bear these words in mind, because they are the key for my shir, for my discussion that I wanted to have today, but we will talk tomorrow instead. And so she said, see, your sister-in-law has returned to her people. Naomi says to Orpa, that's to Ruth, right? Sorry, I think I skipped. Did I skip now? Right? You go follow your sister-in-law. So obviously, Naomi's Orpa's making her way back, and Ruth is cleaving and clinging to her mother-in-law. Batoma Ruth al tifkibi, but Ruth said, "Do not urge me to leave you, Lazveich, Lashem acharayich, to return, to go back from you. Again, powerful words which we'll dissect and analyze tomorrow. Forever you go, Eleich, I will go. Ubasher telini olim, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Ameich ami, your people should be my people. Ve'Elohayich Elohai, and your God is my God." Very famous words. And we'll conclude here with verse 17 for today. Ba'asher tamusi amus, where you die, I will die. Misham ekaber, and there I will be buried. Ko yasa Hashem li, so and more may Hashem do to me, because only death will be able to separate me from you. Obviously, Ruth is infatuated with her mother-in-law. And as the verses continue here, she continues along the way. Even though, as you'll continue reading, which we won't do right now, it comes with struggle and difficulty, challenges and obstacles. And so the first chapter in the book of Ruth ends that it's the season of harvest, of the barley harvest in Israel, which is now this time of the year. And this is the story of Ruth, Naomi, and Orpah. And as we're going to discuss it, here we did it unabridged today in the actual text, uncut. We see Ruth's heartfelt response to her mother-in-law, saying, I'm willing to give up all the comforts of my princess royalty life, but I don't want to separate from you, that your people are my people, and your God is my God. And so I would like to conclude today's shir, and please God, tomorrow we'll continue this theme. We realize that this is a crossroads, a fork in the road in life, and Ruth chooses, unlike her sister-in-law Orpah, to follow Naomi. But is that sensible? Does it make sense? Why? Naomi's urging her, pleading, begging, go back, lead a normal life. You don't have to take on the mishigassen of Judaism that we have. And so please God, tomorrow, I didn't prepare a very long shir, so I'll have to add some more information for tomorrow. But the point is that we'll follow the two paths, the one of Orpah and the one of Ruth. And you would think that Orpah would be the happy one, would go back to her royalty and everything would work out well. But very interesting thing happens, as the Medrash says, that night she slept with 100 men. Just to imagine, what on earth happened? Why did she stoop so low? Why was she consumed with this change, this metamorphosis, where she rejected the values and morals that she seemed to be attracted to with Naomi? And now she goes out to sleep with 100 men that night when she parts ways with Naomi and Ruth. And the Talmud, in fact, tells us that she gave birth to four great children. And we'll discuss who were her descendants. We know who Ruth's descendants were. Who were the descendants of Orpah? Whatever happened with them? And it's a fascinating story that, of course, lends us very interesting lessons for life. And we'll continue with this story, please God, tomorrow. And looking forward to continue this with you. Any questions before we conclude for today? Okay, with that in mind, I see there's a message here. Let's just check if there's a question. Just thank you. Thank you. Okay, with that in mind, Zeikazant, everybody. Have a wonderful day. See you again tomorrow. Please God, we'll continue this fascinating story. All the best.
Thank you, Zeikazant.